Characters here. Are you going to wave?
Yeah.
I'll wave too. I'll wave goodbye to the birthday boy. I didn't tell you this. One of the things in the chapter, we found out where Barry Obama got his name changed legally in 1982, and it was in Canada, which makes perfect sense because he was born in Canada at the Peace Arch Hospital in Surrey, BC in August of '61. Yeah, so he was born in Canada. He changed his name, but he didn't change his name from Barry Spataro. It was Barack Mournier, it's a French-sounding word, M-O-U-R-N-I-E-R.
Yeah.
Ubaid. U-B-A-Y-D. Wait till you hear what Ubaid means. I can't remember.
His original name?
Yeah. Well, that's one of his names. I mean, how many names does that guy have?
I know.
Yeah, well, we're on camera there. Let's go get David. Let's see. I hope David remembers his response. Oh, I guess I have to push a button here. Why are you looking at me? Let's look at David.
Hello, Your Eminence.
Hello, Your Effluence. How are you?
I'm very good.
Good, and we're right on the stroke. In fact, I dialed you at 59, and it turned to 1 p.m. my time, 11 years. Well, first of all, the chapter went up at both places last night, and one of the people that, if there were 10 Able Danger people in this room right now, we would all agree that the guy who made this comment, or gal, is one of our 4 most lethal. But and I'm not self-aggrandizing here, I hope, but somebody who's familiar with every chapter we've ever written said the one that went overnight last night was our best and most lethal ever. And he says if this doesn't start some action, he doesn't know what will. So having said that, I'd let everybody know that the chapter is up at both Able Danger and Presidential Field. And what do we have on our plate today, David? Over to you.
We have a mysterious Beaver-Hat field.
Oh, is that anything to do with JonBenet Ramsey?
Totally. And, you know, this is a classic crime scene, which really, I believe, may help convey the rich power of 6s and 7s, which is an English phrase from the 14th century, to Americans as it relates to major crime scenes where 2 teams are deployed at a mass casualty event, if you want to choose those words appropriately, where one team goes in and is responsible for, let's say, 50% of the mass casualties, and then as it exits the crime scene is responsible for removing the evidence left by the other crime team, who complete the killings for the other half. So you've got 2 teams who swap roles during the time sequence, during the time at the crime. They both commit crimes, i.e. murder for hire, but they're both responsible for cleaning up the other's evidence. So when the grunts arrive to investigate what the hell's going on, and now with people like Obama, what they do is they don't deploy a crime scene investigator in the sense that Able Danger understands it. They employ coroners and morticians to pick up the body bits and present them to the deceased families, a bit like the communist Chinese sending you the bullet that killed one of your loved ones and having you pay. So there's not a lot of difference between the fascism or communism or whatever you like to call it in the United States today and the People's Liberation Army in China. Over to you, Phil.
PLA. Where have I was thinking of another one, SLA, Symbionese Liberation Army, which was back in 73, 74.
Yeah.
With Patty Hearst, I think. But I guess there's a lot of people that have too much time on their hands. And some people might accuse you and I of having too much time in our hands, but I don't. In fact, yesterday, David, I promised somebody, and it wasn't you, it could have been you, but I don't think it was you. I promised somebody, I promised Tim, who is Agent Rooster Cogburn. I said, I've got a real busy day because I have to go get my daughter and her goats, which won a trophy and 3 purple ribbons. And so I absolutely have to have I have to be away from my house by 6 o'clock. But if you can handle a chapter at 6 o'clock my time, I'll get it to you. It's 45 pages plus. Or if you can't handle it, then that's no problem. I'll just work on it when I get back from the goat haul. So I sent him that about 6:30, I think, 6:15. And by the time I got back with the goats, the chapter was up, which is no small task. I don't know how Tim does it that quickly. And then after I was back, I got a call from Craig Peterson, who does the work at Presidential Field and makes the wonderful images. And he said he was working on it. And I said, well, that's great. I'm going to bed because I'm tired of goats. And but I'd much rather be with goats than, say, Hillary Clinton, Barry Swatero, the birthday boy, which reminds me, happy birthday 2 days early. And I think we'll have some reason to celebrate. I hope their house of cards doesn't fall down too fast, because I'd like nothing more than some of this stuff to linger into October, because I'm supposed to speak in Texas in September. So whatever we accomplish by Labor Day would be great. And then if we could accomplish something between Labor Day and Veterans Day, I'm going down to Texas again, I believe, on Veterans Day. But those trips could get canceled at any time, because the nature of what, and I was going to say we write, but we don't write it, I write it. And you think it. Craig makes the images, and I'd say each of Craig's images is worth 200 pages of my fiction. But it doesn't matter who does what or who refuses to take credit for it. At the end of the day, it's God himself that assembled our network. He gets us the information, and for people who have not heard this explained before, the information comes to us in accordance with Jeremiah 33:3 and Daniel 2:21 and 22. And if I was Barry Swatero, Hillary Clinton, or any of the other buffoons that refuse to uphold their oath, if they have one, and refuse to answer the call and support the military effort in Benghazi on 9/11, 2012, they're in big trouble. Not with Abel Danger, not with David and Field. They're in big trouble with God. And they know that, and that's why they're as nervous as cats. David, I had a unique thought today that you and I have never talked about. I just mentioned it to Pastor Klein. He's the first person who heard me, but when I was driving down County Road S to come from my secure compound down to this bulletproof bank, it dawned on me, there were two purposes of the Benghazi false flag. The first one was to try to make Barack Obama, or whoever he really is, try to make him look like a diplomat before the election. He looks more like a doormat than a diplomat. But I think another thing, David, and I'm going to say this slowly, I think that one of the purposes for the selecting of the day, September 11th, was to obfuscate the real September 11th. And they thought maybe by doing something good on September 11th, people like you and me and 300 million Americans would suddenly forget about the false flag that went Alpha Foxtrot uniform, that's AFU, on 9/11. And I say it went Alpha Foxtrot uniform, AFU, because they had 4 airplanes that were supposed to hit 4 targets, and they only got a 75% hack rate. That's not very good. It wasn't good enough. And then people like Saxby Chambliss, oops, I slipped. I didn't mean to disparage the weasel senator from Georgia. Did he know about the 4 July event that we got canceled because Napolitano chickened out? Yeah, I think he did. But I know in 2002, he was part of an operation to get rid of Max Cleland from the Senate because Cleland had a brain. For those of you who have not read chapter 23, Max Cleland is the Army veteran from the Khe Sanh battle. He left his right arm, his left leg, and his right leg in Khe Sanh in April of 1968. I sat in first class. In fact, he was in seat 1B. I got the last seat on the airplane. In October of 2002, he was going up to Fargo to campaign. The agent who had almost a full airplane knew I was supposed to ride in the cockpit in the jump seat. It's called an ACM or an XCM. And the agent, who was, we used to call him Too Tall, and we also called him Briefcase. he always put his computer monitor had to go on top of his giant briefcase because he was so tall, he'd have to bend over to use the keyboards. But anyway, he knew of my values, and he must have appreciated them because he said, "Oh, sorry, Captain McConnell, you can't have the jump seat. You've been assigned seat 1A." Well, in seat 1B was Max Cleland, and we had a brief conversation about the weasels in Washington. And I said that it didn't matter to me what the weasels in Washington did because at the end of the day, God's in control. And he says, "Well, where do you get that idea?" I said, "From Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, because God revealed it to me personally in February of 1994. And then Max Cleland, without skipping a beat, now remember, he's only got one limb. He's got his right arm. I think it's his left arm. And I was sitting on his left side. He said, "Reach into my shirt pocket and grab my leather secretary." So I reached into his shirt pocket. I pulled out a small leather book like this. Well, I was successful reaching into his shirt pocket. A little tough on mine because it's so stuffed. Anyway, I said, "Okay, Max, I've got the briefcase or the leather secretary. What do you want me to do with it now?" He said, "Just open the front cover." So I opened the front cover, and he said, "What do you read right there?" I said, "I read, lean not on your own, no, trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding, in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your path." So I might have gotten that wrong depending on what version. But what struck Max Cleland, Army veteran with one limb and a heart and a mind, and a Marine with four limbs and a heart and a mind, was what are the odds that we'd be seated side by side when he was a retired U.S. Senator. He may have still been active at that time, I'm not certain. He got pushed out by a guy that I'm going to call Sexy Shameless. And if Saxby Chambliss thinks I'm referring to him, I don't even know who Saxby Chambliss is, other than he's the one that covered up the United bankruptcy that caused Dan Hanley to be incarcerated on bogus psychological issues. And then Dan Hanley today lives in Pakistan because Sexy Shameless was such a horridly corrupt U.S. senator that he didn't feel safe living in Georgia. That's sort of a run-on answer to a question you didn't ask, David. So what else should we talk about?
Okay, Phil, well, what I'd ask you to do is if you can scroll up the chat room and you can see the resonating communication between you and me that relates to the post that went to you this morning.
Yeah.
And if you will, perhaps you could read that first paragraph. And if I may, I'd like to interrupt you as you go through it because you said something about goats. Yep. And one of the things I want at the end of the first paragraph that you read out is to ask you to describe what you did with an errant goat that butted you, because I think it's an important form of justice that needs to be applied to some of the characters that we're talking about today. Over to you. Okay,
am I supposed to read 1636?
Yes.
Marine links Haig-Interpol-Marcy Foreign Fugitive Day to Paulson Beaver-Hat trap of JonBenet. Plum City, abledanger.net, August 5th, 2013. And by the way, David, I invited FBI Oath Keepers to monitor our show today because I think we're getting more and more support from the FBI. Anyway, United States Marine Field McConnell has linked the use of Haig-Interpol-Marcy, Foreign Fugitive File to hire and deploy parolee escapee contract hit teams with a 1-day or 48-hour alibi to crime scene evidence related to the JonBenet Ramsey murder, including a beaver hair allegedly from a winter uniform hat worn by a colleague of RCMP Commissioner Bob Paulson, and the trapper's knot garrote used to kill the girl on Christmas Day of 1996. I think what we're doing with your writing and with my fiction is we're gonna tear down the Gorelick Wall and expose the Haig octopus wall that walled out FBI. They were walled out of any communications between RCMP and Interpol, which I think is a French bunch of maggots. David, What's the question about goats again? And I'll give you a laconic 20-minute run-on answer.
Well, you talked about you'd rather be with your goats than Hillary Clinton, and I can entirely empathize with that. Not that I have intimate relations with goats, but of course neither do you. But you told me a fascinating story about a goat that butted you and how you dealt with it. And I think as we're approaching D-Day, and apparently on August the 7th, which is my birthday, it's the moon sighting day, which determines the day of the end of Ramadan. So tell us how you dealt with that goat, and then we'll pick it up from there.
Okay, and before I do that, I just want to see if Agent Sherlock is here today, because I got some information from either Agent Mona Blue or Sherlock yesterday that I slipped in the chapter right at the end about the, according to the Quran, either August 4th or August 7th is the power night. And so if Sherlock can tell me for sure if it's August 4th or August 7th, and I don't have a preference, I just want to be truthful, but we get so much good information from so many good people. I'll just try to make this a very brief post-mortem story on a goat that didn't behave. And by the way, in the Bible, if you want to read about sheep and goats, it might be Matthew 25:22. If it is Matthew 25:22, Maranatha in Texas will probably confirm that. And if it's not Matthew 25:22, she'll probably correct me. But off the top of my head, if it's Matthew 25:22, it says that in the end, God shall judge the nations, and the sheep shall go to the right and the goats to the left. And when I read that for the first time in about 2005, maybe 2006, no, it would have been 2005, I looked out of my bedroom window and I saw two barns. And the barn for the sheep was on the right and the barn for the goats was on the left. Is it close? No?
Well,
It's not.
The print of this thing is so fine.
Yeah, he's
20.
Anyway, we'll work on that. Let me tell a story. In fact, if Maranatha or anybody else can do a Bible Gateway search for the sheep and the goats, you'll find it quickly. But rather than, I can find it myself here as soon as I get done telling you the story. Last year, I went out to, what?
2532.
Oh, 2532. I was close. 20. I mean, you can't memorize the whole Bible unless you're somebody like, well,
no, he hasn't done it either.
well, he's my principal Bible resource right there, Pastor Clyde Holt. And speaking of church, I had a meeting with some church people yesterday, and then I got a phone call or two this morning. And this letter that I wrote, people are responding very favorably. They like that. Yes, they respond. They think that I wrote a letter when I quit going to a certain church, David, because I know how rumors fly, and they fly just as fast with churchgoers as they do with non-churchgoers, maybe even faster. Yeah. So I decided, I had 3 or 4 people say, hey, Phil, why are you not going to church anymore? And I said, well, I'm not going to answer that. I said, I'll put my thoughts in writing, and I'll number 10 copies, and I'll give 10 copies to the elders and some other people. And anyway, apparently people were impressed because they're getting the straight story, and they're all getting the same straight story, and they can't change it. But David, on a certain night last fall, as I recall, well, let's stop right there. Are you thinking about something I did about a year ago, David?
I am.
Yeah, okay, good. Then I know what you're talking about. I had 2 adult bucks, and a buck is an intact male, as opposed to the people leading England, the United States, and Canada. But enough about human anatomy. Let's get back to the goats. If a male goat has a pair of testicles, he's considered a buck. If those have been removed surgically, and I have a daughter that my kids are very capable. One of my daughters just loves turning bucks into wethers. So, in fact, this is how our chapters get written. If any of the dangerettes could remember the word wether, W-E-T-H-E-R, and this goes right back to Chicago because there's some remnants of the weather underground. I think in chapter 24, these enucleated males are going to become the weather, W-E-T-H-E-R. underground, which reminds me, I will answer your question, but I got to see if Craig is here today. Craig starts with a K. Okay, I think that's what he calls himself, and so he's not here today. I love Craig's. Well, on the presidential field, chapter 23, the first image, I'll find it for you, Clyde. It shows a male mammal standing up with a pair of male indicating appendages clearly visible, and Craig put my face on it. And I think the sign in it might be a beaver, it could be a woodchuck, but whatever this male mammal is with my face, he's holding a sign that says, "Honk if you like my nuts." And I think the point is that there's some people who still are sidetracked thinking that you and I are courageous or brave, David. And I don't think that's true in my case. I'm just doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And so far, it's working well. Goodbye, Janet Napolitano. But anyway, here we go, back to this goat. I went out to this pair of male goats one night last fall. And the goats should know me, just like the sheep know the master's voice, which reminds me, the first song in chapter 24, which I started this morning, is the master's call. And it includes this: one night we rustled cattle, 1,000 head in all. No, one night we rustled cattle, 1,000 head or so, and started them out on the trail that leads to Mexico. When a norther started blowing and lightning flashed around, I thought someone was calling me, I thought I heard a sound. And in that moment, lightning struck not 20 yards from me, and left there was a giant cross where once there'd been a tree. Anyway, no matter what you ask me, I'm going to bring it back to God, just like the cross in the song The Master's Call, which is already in chapter 24. And just in case Bucky Badger or any of our agents down there in Atlanta are listening, the secular song is one that's going to make some people my age go back 30 years, because they will not have heard this song in the last 30 years. Unless they're an over-the-road trucker or somebody who has pastel dreams all day long. It's called Atlanta Blue, and in chapter 23, our airplane left Red Wing, Minnesota, heading for Atlanta. So whatever put Atlanta Blue into my head this morning, I went right back to, in fact, I was on my way out to do the goats, and I knew I'd forget that if I didn't turn around and go YouTube it, so I put Atlanta Blue in, and it's a significant song. Simply because I'm going to stick that in Sexy Shameless's left earlobe in fiction. But also, it's a rare song when the bass singer sings lead. And apparently, this is the only song by the, who did Flowers on the Statler Brothers. It's the only song by the Statler Brothers where their bass singer, Harold Reed, sang the lead part. And it's a very good song. I'd put it on, but that would get us in trouble with YouTube and people like that. So I'll put it in chapter 24. But anybody can find it by searching for Atlanta Blue and the Statler Brothers. In fact, I'll bet you within 60 seconds it'll be posted in the chat room. In fact, just the timing, because so you guys can see if it's posted there. So I go out to the goat barn, and I go in with these two male bucks that are both about two or 3 years old, and they both have a nice rack of horns. And by the way, the horns on a goat is what regulates their body temperature. And so if you rip their horns off, which I've done unintentionally, but sometimes the goats can get pretty nasty. And a male goat, when it's rutting or breeding season, if he detects the aroma of a female goat, even if he can't see her, if he can scent it, they go nuts. And what the male goats do to make themselves attractive to female goats is they urinate on themselves, and it gives them a real pungent smell, almost like thunder thighs or Sasquatch, I presume. But anyway, so I went out to these male goats, and it's breeding season, so they're a little bit more frustrated or agitated or energetic or optimistic or all the above, check yes or no. So I get in with these bucks, and I'm going to give them their grain and check their water and make sure they have some hay and a dry place to sleep. And so I'm putting grain. Oh, I better put the camera on myself or you won't see how I did this. So I lean over about halfway, and I'm putting grain into a feeder, and a buck comes up behind me and bumps me in my rear end. It's called butting. B-U-T-T-I-N-G, like sheep butt or antelope butt or moose's butt or a lot of these tall animals that have nothing to do except wait for the girls to cycle. They like to butt heads until then. So this goat butted me, and I turned around and told him in perfect Queen's English. I said, the next time you do that, pal, you're a dead goat. Apparently he didn't speak English. He must have been one of them queer French-speaking goats. Because the next thing he did, with total discretion and malice aforethought, he lowered his horns and went right for one of my knees. And I grabbed him by the horn. In fact, now that I think about it, I grabbed him by both horns, and I rotated his neck around 180 degrees, so his neck hurts, and he's looking at me, and so I'm upside down to him, and I said, you sit here for about 3 minutes and think you're really a tough goat. I'm going to go get a boomstick, and then we're going to find out which one of us is surviving the evening. Enjoy the grain. And I walked back to the house, and I got a 357, and I got a 9mm, and when I got out there, I thought, well, rather than irritate him, I think I'll use the 357. And he got one look at a 6.5-inch barrel, and then he went to wherever Muslims think they go to find 72 virgin goats. So David, that's the story, and that's absolutely true as far as my dispatching a goat. In fact, I told you there were 2, and I just shot one. A couple weeks later, I went out to the survivor, and he hadn't learned much from his brother, and he butted me in the knee. So I twisted his head around. That's how you get the attention of a goat. You twist their head around 180 degrees. And of course, if you had anger management issues, you might just break their neck. But I don't have anger management issues because I think the quickest way to lose a fight is to get angry. And that's another good way to lose your position of authority or your position of advantage is to get frustrated when things don't go fast enough. Like Dan Hanley, the United pilot that was screaming to Sexy Shameless. Oh, sorry, I slipped. I meant Sexy Shameless. Sexy Shameless was the guy that replaced Max Cleland, and Max Cleland was the guy that left 3 of his limbs in Quezon as probably a 23-year-old Army lieutenant or captain. His picture, both with his limbs and without, is in chapter 23, and I think little by little I'm becoming a Studebaker collector, if 5 Studebakers makes you a collector, but little by little I'm also becoming a very vocal advocate for military men of all nations that leave their limbs on the battlefield for the benefit of bankers. And David, I'm going a different direction on you now. So now that we've killed the goats, 2 of them last year, makes me a crack shot because I only had to fire 1 bullet. Of course, I knew if you want to kill something like a horse, a cow, a goat, you stick the gun right behind the head here and you aim for the nose. And that way you're sure to get the brain because they have pretty small brains or they wouldn't have tried to butt me twice in one night. Having said that, David, have you seen in the overnight news that HSBC is canceling their contracts with a lot of diplomats in the Vatican? Over to you.
Yeah, not quite sure what that means, Field. Over to you.
I'm not sure what it means either. You're the smart guy. I'm the guy that kills goats. But what else? What direction should we go now? I think I'm going to check the chat room and see what I find there of any interest. I see there's some beaver hats in the garrote neck. Oh, that's you that put that up. And then there's
okay, Field, can I ask you to read the second paragraph? I just put it up. McConnell invites.
Yeah, if I can find it, I'll read it. Yeah, McConnell.
It's right at the bottom.
Yeah. Well, you assume it's at the bottom of your screen, and therefore it's at my screen, but I get a lag. So what you see, I may not see till later. World's greatest living goat killer invites readers to consider the evidence of unknown pubic hair, bondage devices, duct tape, animal hair, boot print, stun gun mark, unknown male DNA as used in the 2003 ruling by U.S. District Judge Julie Carnes to exclude the Ramsey family as suspects, and now used by McConnell to identify the controlling minds behind the U.S. foreign fugitive file developed by him, that's Haig-Interpol-Marcy, for the Christmas Day killing of JonBenet. And the delicious part of this is Al Haig is deader than a doornail, just like those 2 goats. And I don't take any happiness in anyone's death, but I know I personally would rather die myself than see another little girl like JonBenet taken advantage of by some absolute enemies of God. David, over to you.
Yeah, and that's right. And that's the analogy, you see, because the goat butted you because it was, whether it found you attractive, I don't know, or maybe it considered you competition for the female goats. But the attack on JonBenet Ramsey was orchestrated by, you could call them satanic forces. And I think in the old days, when I was interested in studying witchcraft and stuff like that, the devil is always presented as a goat. But the attack on JonBenet Ramsey and her family and civilized life in the United States requires fairly radical treatment, not excluding putting these people in front of a firing squad, because justice delayed is justice denied. But the bigger picture here, Field, and I think, or I hope you remember that I've often said, I believe the JonBenet Ramsey murder of Christmas Day of 1996 to be possibly the most important murder of the last century. And people look at me as though I'm a nut. Well, quite possibly I am. You know, how can you say the killing of a 6 or 7-year-old girl is important? But this was extremely important because it was strategic. It was actually the ultimate humiliation visited upon a great country on one of its most important days, and that is Christmas Day. And my sense is that in 1987, when the United States government launched, in collaboration with Interpol and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Foreign Fugitives File system, that may have represented a sea change in, if you will, counterintelligence in the United States that might have subsequently protected the United States from the kinds of attack we saw with Pan Am 103 and the 1993 attacks that we've talked about, the 1998 attacks on the East African embassies, the 2000 attack on USS Copenhagen Harbor, and so on ad nauseum, where no one does nothing in the United States Department of Justice because your sister set up a variety of bureaucratic instruments to block justice. So going back to the launch of the Foreign Fugitive File system in 1987, and challenging, if you will, everyone who listens to us, not just at this show today, but who will hear it if it's relayed over the video or Vimeos or whatever it is, a technique. They should go back to 1987 and see who had any kind of power to institute this nonsense of a foreign fugitive file, where the authority to populate that file was handed off by the American government at the time to its friends, and I put that parenthetically, in Canada with the RCMP and with Interpol. And the person who did that was a traitor. So it's interesting to look at who was the head of Interpol in 1987. Now I'm going to take a break here a moment, Phil, because it was 1987 or 1988. Your sister gave you a call, asked ostensibly about one thing, but I think she had another agenda which will result one day in her standing in front of a firing squad. What did she call you about in 1988, where you gave advice that is relevant to the problem we're discussing today? Over to you.
It was around Christmas time, and I honestly can't remember if it was 87 or 88, but I'll stipulate out of court that it was December of 88. And the way we would find out, it's almost like mentally Googling, but all I'd have to do is go back to a certain, I can't think of his name right now, but the guy that builds more hotels than anybody else in the United States of America, he has a business in Fargo on I-29, and it's called, his surname, whatever it is, Enterprises. And they, when I was last lucid 3 years ago, they were putting up 4 5-star hotels in Las Vegas at one time. And the name will come to me, the name's insignificant, but the way we could prove whether it was December of 87 or 88 is I could call him personally and I would ask him what year it was that somebody failed to deliver in a financial contract worth millions perhaps, and when they couldn't pay cash, they gave him a Lockheed Jetstar 4-engine executive jet. They're notorious gas hogs, by the way, so it's not really a good executive jet. But it was one of the first executive jets used by the United States Air Force and government to haul snobs around. And if somebody, well, I see the towers are coming down again. If somebody, what was I thinking of here? Yes, it's a C-140 Jetstar made by Lockheed. If somebody likes airplanes like Jack Mack or CCW, perhaps you could post a picture. But it's driving me nuts that I can't remember that guy's last name because it used to be right on the tip of my tongue, but I guess that's part of the aging process. My sister called and said, we need to find some way to deliver federal prisoners from Hawaii to the mainland safely. And I said, no, you don't. We do it all the time at Northwest Airlines. And I said, it's quite, in fact, I remember one thing that involves Washington State and Spokane. On my flight from Minneapolis to Spokane, we had a escaped convict who was so vilified and hated in Washington State. It turns out he was a pedophile, and he had done something and killed a little girl in Washington State, and then he took a hike. I don't know if I've ever seen more law enforcement than the ring of law enforcement that surrounded our airplane. And they weren't there to prevent him from getting away. They were there to try to make sure nobody killed him before they could get him into a courtroom. And, you know, going back to my killing goats, there are some people in our country as well as others that are richly deserving of justice. However, it's written somewhere that vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. And I have total confidence that these people that are the enemies of God that we're exposing as we're directed to do in Ephesians 5:11, I know for certain they're as nervous as cats because they're spewing forth so many lies that are so easy to bust through for us. They're trying to distract, first they're trying to distract us off 9/11 by having Benghazi on 9/11. Then they're trying to distract us off Benghazi, which was the bungle done by the two chief bunglers would be Hillary, and if anybody doesn't know which Hillary, I'm talking about Hillary Diane Rodham Clinton. You can shorten that up by saying Thunder Thighs. And she got left holding the bag because, as is evidenced clearly in chapter 23, Barak Mornier Ubaid was busy stuffing his chorizo, not chorizo, his chorizo into Reggie's cornhole. Now, I put that in writing. If that offends anybody, well, you know what offends me, that here it is 17 years after JonBenet Ramsey apparently had some male DNA on her, or worse. And this male DNA, I mean, real males don't do this. For instance, Jessica Lloyd. Let's take a trip up north where ladies wear beaver coats in the winter and men wear beaver hats, leaving beaver hair back where little 6-year-old girls have been violated by Canadian creeps. And I'm not being nationalistic. There's creeps in the United States of America. But we have a magnet out in D.C. that draws most of the creeps to that area if they're far enough east to avoid the magnetic draw of effluence of the gay Bay Area. So, not to belabor bipolar queers, but I find it very offensive that the United States of America has not delivered justice in the case of JonBenet Ramsey. We're willing to help them. Apparently, we have greater investigative tools than they do. And also, you know, here it is 12 years after 9/11, and we know it's still scaring them because they're posting all these terror alerts, which are a great big joke. The terror alert, if you want to see a good terror alert, 36 hours before the U.S. posted the terror alert, somebody sitting in this office, I won't use his name, but he looks like this guy, posted terror alert 1305, which means 2013, fifth terror alert that we've issued, and ours went from August 2nd to September 3rd. And whatever it may or may not accomplish. I guarantee 100%, David, it confuses the people that are supposed to be in the intelligence business because they have no idea why I picked September 3rd, because their initial date for the sunset of the threat was August 17th, and then they rescheduled it. They said, no, the threat will be out there until August 31st. Well, two can play that game. So for whatever reason, I picked the 3rd of September, and there is a reason that'll remain secret for a while. We went ahead and stuck it right back to their face and said, you guys were wrong. The threat to the United States of America regarding terrorism, which can easily be found by Googling these names, and I'll try to be fairly clear speaking. Cameron, Zuma, Z-U-M-A, Thatcher, Obama, Shale, S-H-A-L-E, Cook, C-O-O-K, Kelly, K-E-L-L-Y. Here's the red herring. Make sure you spell it right. Blatchford, B-L-A-T-C-H-F-O-R-D, plus McConnell. Now, if somebody Googles all those names, you'll find out that the Palindaba pickles that were last known to be in Chicago, at one point they were rumored to be heading for North Korea, but those three Palindaba pickles are still unaccounted for, and until they're accounted for, they are a threat to mainland targets in the United States of America, including these, but not limited to these: Assumption Parish, Louisiana; Indianapolis, Indiana; Goodyear, Arizona; Yellowstone, Montana; Portland, Oregon, and redacted. David, over to you. Did you ask me a question, and if so, did I come close to answering it?
Yes, well, I don't think you did, Phil, but what was said by your sister around the 1987-1988 period was, how do you take care of prisoners who might riot and mutiny and take over the plane? And you replied, or you described basically, go ahead.
Yeah, I told her you just drone the airplanes, and she said, what's droning? And I said, you take out the human pilots that nobody likes anyway because they think they get paid too much until two engines quit, and suddenly your rear end puckers up like a pencil couldn't be driven through it with a 20-pound hammer. But you know, most people just go around thinking pilots are jerks, and I happen to be one of those people. But if you want to make it absolutely impossible for humans to hijack an airplane, then you need to drone it. And by the way, every glass cockpit airliner out there to flying today is droned. That means it's been fitted with an uninterruptible autopilot, whether that autopilot is a TALS, T-H-A-L-E-S, I think it's pronounced TALIS. I guess it looks like Thales to me, but T-H-A-L-E-S. Thales is a little light in the loafers, so I guess I'll go with TALIS. But it doesn't matter if it's a TALIS, a Boeing, or a hybrid. And what I mean by hybrid is, in the case of the Boeing 747-400s, the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot was either engineered or built by Thales, I believe. Boeing's own admission in an article written in London, England on the 3rd of March of 2007 that said within 2 years, every airliner in the world will be equipped with the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot. Okay, they can't have it both ways. It's more than 2 years since 2007, it's 6 years. So standing on their words, I am telling whoever might listen to this that every airliner out there can be remotely controlled, which is a good thing if humans are trying to hijack it and drive it into a tall building, such as did not occur on the morning of 9/11. However, there's a two-edged sword here. Whatever can be used for your safety by good people can be used for your death by bad people. How so? Well, let's rattle off some flight numbers here, and these are not randomly taken from a 1976 Philadelphia phone book. Colgan 3407, where a woman, Beverly Eckert, was murdered. American 11, American 77, United 93, United 175. I think Egypt's number was 990. TWA's number was 800. Korean, oh, this is a nice one. The Korean flight was 007. Air France was 447. Atom Air was 574. Kenya Airways was 507. Turkish Airways was 1951. And Speedbird was Speedbird 38. I got to give a whole lot of credit to the British captain of Speedbird 38 because on short final at Heathrow, when both engines quit, and it's two-engine airplane, so when both of them quit, you're suddenly without thrust, much to the displeasure of Ginger Cookie. But the captain of that flight, rather than jump through his own sphincter, sat there calmly watching the co-pilot manage energy, and that's all pilots do. Some pilots don't know this, but all they really do is they do advanced math and they manage energy. And what I mean by managing energy, when those engines quit, and I don't know when they quit, but if Skymaster's here or if Jack Mac's here, I don't think Craig's here, they could find out how far the aircraft was from the runway, and I'm guessing maybe a mile. But the airplane was configured for landing, which means the landing gear's down, the flaps are extended, and then the engines quit. So how do you manage energy when you don't have any engines? Well, if I was that co-pilot, I'd bring up some flaps so you have less drag. And I would put the flaps at the highest L/D max, that's lift over drag max. Typically, a flap trailing edge device will create more lift than drag down to the 50% travel of whatever range it may have. DC-10 was my favorite airliner, and originally you could get to 50 degrees of flaps, which means if my theory about lift over drag max holds water, had I been the co-pilot of a DC-10 with a dolt for a captain, which by the way I was many times, and all three engines quit, I'd retract the flaps to 25. And if the captain tried to stop me, I'd break his arm. Because sometimes you have to do what you have to do. But to answer your question, I told my sister about droning aircraft. I believe that my sister and Hillary Clinton then sat around with a bunch of other fat cows, and sometime after October 22nd of 1996, when they determined and they declared it was their goal to reinvent government, I wonder who authorized these fat cows to reinvent government. It certainly was not we the people. But they took that good idea of droning aircraft and they used it against the United States of America in the morning of 9/11 when United 175, American 11, and America at 77 were taken to Whiskey 386 airspace and destroyed by Smacksonic under the military control of NEADS, Northeast Air Defense Sector, commanded that day by Colonel Robert Marr. And the controller for Whiskey 386 was a Navy First Class Petty Officer whose call sign was Giant Killer. How appropriate. David was a giant killer. He went out with a slingshot against Goliath, and Goliath probably thought that was going to be an easy day's work. And one stone later, Goliath was dead. And so if someone out there, if anybody out there questions the ability of one of us to create pandemonium for all of them, don't question it any longer. We can. And just like God gave that, I think David was about 12 years old, wasn't he? Do you know David and Goliath?
Probably more like 14, 15.
Oh, okay, I'll put it in the chat room. If anybody out there can find a reference to David's age, Clyde thinks that it's 14 or 15.
Nobody knows.
Oh, yeah, nobody knows. It's not written down. Yeah. Okay, well, it was a young man against a big man, and the big guy fell. Same thing here. The people trying to impart fear into all the hearts of 330 million Americans can go pound sand. So, David, the answer to your question is, my sister wanted a way to make sure that human hijackers, these being federal prisoners on a trans-Pacific flight, could not cause the aircraft to crash. I told her it's real easy. It cost $300,000, and that was in 1988 dollars. The reason I knew that and had it on the top of my head is because I used to go out and fly against drones, hitting several. Drones such as a PQM-102, which is a Sperry Rand F-102, Delta Dagger, and an F-100, and when that thing was droned, it was called a QF-100D, I believe, and I popped one of those at Willie Tell in 1986 when the hapless Canadian pilots with their faggy little CF-18s They neither made a big statement in the air, nor did they show up at the officers club, where the North Dakota Air National Guard not only got 3 of the 5 trophies, but we also won the competition in the club every night. David, over to you.
Yes, thanks, Field. And your sister was lying in 1987 or 1988 when she called you about the possibility of controlling a prisoner mutiny. What she was doing, this is a hypothesis, is she, in conjunction with Mark John Richard Simpson, who was the first US Interpol president from 1984 to 1988 and former director of the United States Secret Service from 1981 to 1992, i.e., he was in charge of the United States Secret Service during the period when this dialogue with you and your sister was going on. What she was doing with them was trying to develop a technique of so intimidating the prison population and entrapping and extorting them that various selected individuals suitable for a particular task in hand, like the rape of JonBenet, could be employed, trained, and groomed, and then using a automatic guidance system steered towards a crime scene, arrive at a crime scene at a carefully controlled time, participate in a killing, and be extracted from that crime scene, confident that the crime scene evidence would be so disrupted through sixes and sevens, she and her cronies would get away with it. And I noticed an interesting dialogue between Oversight and Sherlock at the chat room. Sherlock says, and I think absolutely right, it's Canada's national symbol. So if a beaver hair was left at the JonBenet crime scene, it was intentional. A message to those who know. Well, now we know. Oversight says, I agree, Sherlock re-beaver hair must have been intentional. So just imagine, Field, there are legitimate people in every government agency in the United States and Canada. If they sense that the chain of command has been compromised by this, or individuals who exist in this foreign fugitive file, such that at any time, anywhere in the world, they or their family may be literally wiped out or killed or tortured or whatever, then most individuals in that chain of command will be, I think, intimidated into silence. So I think your sister, back in 1987 or 1988, if she was asking that question, she had the power to deliver whatever the technology was you described to her, which includes this droning technique. The question we have to answer is, what was she using it for? Was she intending to use it to stop prisoners from mutinying on a plane? Now I'm thinking back, why would you mutiny on a plane, even if you're a prisoner, with a strong likelihood that the plane is going to crash and you're going to die? It's far more likely what she's trying to do is coral pedophile psychopaths into a prison transportation system for which in 1996, she was given the Gore Hammer Award for the launch and sponsorship of the United States Justice, Prisoner, and Alien Transportation System, which actually reflected, in my opinion, the technology that you talked about 8 years earlier. So to cut a long story short, I got a feeling, I don't think we want to name him because we've got the Haig and the 8 people in the octopus. I got a feeling this fellow, Mark Richard Simpson, I'll just put up his brief bio. Mark John Richard Simpson, born February the 13th, 1932, was the first US Interpol president, 1984 and 1988, and former director of the United States Secret Service. So what is Interpol? Well, folks, Interpol is an international police organization that tracks pedophiles, killers, terrorists, etc., including the thousands of escapees that the Canadians have let out of jail systems around the world in the run-up to an attack on the end of Ramadan, which is imminent. So I believe, Field, your sister and the other members of the octopus, we can go over that in a minute, have selected the end of Ramadan as a day where they need to have the foreign fugitive file facility to pull out teams of people who can launch simultaneous attacks on American, British, Canadian, and Australian targets around the world to demonstrate the total incompetence and failure of the American government to defend its citizens against such an attack. And the timing, they can pick and choose because the database exists. But the database, the foreign fugitive file database, is not in the control of the United States government. It's not in control of that useless dickhead sitting in the White House. It's in the control of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Commissioner, Bob Paulson, today. And Christine Marcy, who wanders around the world, or used to wander around the world with a lesbian girlfriend, visiting, as far as I can judge, Romanian orphanages. So the bond that holds these people together, can you just repeat the story that you just gave about the pedophile being transported? I think that's vitally important. I never heard that story from you before, Phil, but I think this is the cement or bond that binds these people into silence. Just say again what happened with that prisoner.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I was flying in Airbus, but I know it's from Minneapolis to Spokane, and we knew that we had a federal prisoner who had escaped from custody and been captured by the U.S. Marshals, or captured probably by police officers, but then he was turned over to U.S. Marshals who were going to haul him back to face charges in Washington State. And what he had done is he had, I'm not going to use the word with R because I really hate that word, but he'd taken advantage of a young girl and then killed her. And he's going to pay eternal price for that, I suppose. Maybe if he's lucky, he'll be smart enough to talk to a prison pastor who will lead him to the foot of the cross, but maybe not. There are a lot of prison pastors, by the way. I'm sitting 10 feet from one right now, and I knew another one named Kurt Frankhauser, who was in the Cass County, North Dakota prison chaplain, and those guys do a good job. And there's certain people that are considered to be incorrigible, and a lot of pedophiles fall into that category, I understand from conversations with people who know about pedophiles. I'm not one. But on whatever day this would have been, we hauled a escaped murderer and pedophile back from Minneapolis to Spokane, and when we taxied up to the gate at Spokane, I can't remember the name of the field. Maybe it's Geiger, G-E-I-G-E-R.
I'm not sure.
You know, I'm not either. Somebody will know. Skymaster or Jack Mack, have a race and tell me if my brain's still working, if it's Spokane, Geiger Airport. My brain is still working enough to tell you at night if you go into Spokane and you've never been there before, if you're not paying attention, you'll end up at Fairchild Air Force Base because it's bigger, it's brighter, and the runways are favorably aligned. And I'd never had the displeasure of landing at Fairchild when I was trying to get into Spokane. But on this day in history, it was broad daylight. We zipped into Spokane. We came up to the gate. As I'm approaching the gate, I see probably 10 or 15 police-type cars, trucks, vans, and there's a big ring of law enforcement that, it encircled our aircraft. And I thought that was quite odd. And so when I went to the boarding door and some law enforcement people came on, I said something lighthearted like I always do about, gee, I've never seen so many police officers in one place. And they said, yeah, we got a child killer that we need to keep alive so he can face justice. And they took the child killer first. And is it the fact that he killed the child that everybody was so upset about, the civilian population? And that's why they were there, is to protect him. That's not to suggest that the law enforcement thought he was worthy of protection, but they wanted to make sure the prosecution didn't get goofed up by somebody taking a pot shot. And so they got him safely to the prison, and I presume he had a case and he's been well, I don't know if Washington has the death penalty, but he'd certainly have been cooling his heels for about 11 years now. In a lot of parts of this country of ours, David, if somebody did something to a young girl or a young boy, they might find themselves missing in action because not everybody has faith in the justice system. And I think if anybody such as myself would say that our justice system does not warrant faith, I don't think that could be argued. David, over to you.
Yeah, and you see, I think your sister would have been able to observe, she's a very bright woman, that under the guise of deploying marshals to protect pedophiles from being killed by their fellow prisoners, she can create what I think in intelligence terms is called a dual use capability. That is to say, she could build files, and remember, she was assistant director of the Office of Personnel Management and engineered the transfer of the files on people, presumably including pedophiles, in the federal government to USIS, the United States Investigation Service, and her former boss at the Office of Employment Opportunity, Frank Carlucci. So your sister has all of the files that would describe members of the Secret Service, the CIA, the FBI, the regular government department, Justice Department of Transport, background files, and using modern search techniques, actually they go back quite a while with Oracle, she could put together a team of people within the Secret Service who were suspected or could be framed as though they were pedophiles, and then on certain selected days say to them, I've got a job of work to do. And I'm personalizing it here. I'm not saying that she would ring them up personally, but she had that capability of ringing up anyone in the United States government, including her friend Robert Swan Mueller, the director of the FBI, and saying, Robert, I've got a job of work for you to do. And the individual at the other end would know that this woman was the most dangerous person in America, as I've said many, many times before, because she has the files associated with the foreign fugitive file system created by Interpol, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and this guy who was the head of the Secret Service in the United States at the time, which would indicate to an individual so targeted that if that information was released to the general public, they would be, in the words you just used, missing in action. And their passage from where they were presently to where they might end up missing in action might involve having bits of their anatomy removed. So your sister is just an amazingly dangerous woman. But backing up to 1988, so she gets from you some of the key words, and she wouldn't have needed to be an expert in avionics or autopilots, etc., to pass on colleagues in the Department of Justice and the United States Secret Service the elements of a transportation system which could pick up individual parolees or escapees, just as is being planned for the end of Ramadan as we speak, and assemble them into two independent teams. Now, I believe Osama bin Laden is quoted as saying that they had three independent networks. He may have used the word in Arabic financial networks, but which all of the resources and the British and the Americans could not stop moving assets around the world. Well, I think one of those networks would be comprised of the individuals on your sister's, well, let's give it its full title, on the HIM network, which is the Haig-Interpol-Marcy network, which can deploy pedophile psychopaths and other kinds of killers in and out of a crime scene for a 24 or 1 day or a 48-hour or a 72-hour period. Now, the period covered in amalgam Virgo, I believe, was 30 hours described as a blue air period. Can you describe, Field, strategically what happened to the United States Air Force during that 30-hour blue air period described in the fight flow diagram for amalgam Virgo? Over to you.
Well, it's time like these. I wish Craig Peterson was here, and I don't think he is. Nope, I've confirmed he's missing in action. But Jack Mack is here, and so is CCW, and one of those guys may be able to throw up. Well, of course they can throw up if you mean regurgitate, but what I meant was post. Perhaps they could go find Amalgam Virgo 01 35-page document, post a link to it, and people can look through it at their own leisure. But the 30-hour stand down of the United States Air Defense structure, which is off the top of my head, it's commanded, the gaining command, they call it, is the 1st Air Force at Tyndall Air Force Base in Panama City, Florida, where they have great beer and lots of good oysters. But you don't want to eat the oysters in any month with an R in it, like March, September, October. And I proved that to my own satisfaction once. But anyway, enough about that. You asked me a question about the 30-hour period, and on June 1st and 2nd of 2001, the Canadians and the Americans had agreed to, if Canada asked for it, that the United States would turn over the responsibility for the sovereignty of the U.S. lower 48 state airspace to the Canadians, which is the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. Not just for America to trust Canada, but for any country to trust somebody else. In fact, you want to see a real dumb country? Take a look at the United Kingdom, trusting France for 45 years. And I don't know when that started, I think about 2 to 3 years ago, but they signed a deal where Cameron, of course, and now you get into who are the Scots? Do the Scots even like the English, or do the Scots want to hammer the English? Well, I think it makes a pretty compelling argument that he's not trying to help the English with David Cameron, who's actually Scottish. The name being Geddes, Geddes, when his ancestors ignited the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. But there's a lot of dumb things done by militaries and by nations, and I can't count all the time somebody over in the Muslim world would ask me why America has such bad foreign policy, and I said, well, that's easy. It's because it's not our foreign policy. It's the foreign policy of the global banker elitist in Europe. And I never had anybody argue that or rebut it. If you take a look at Isaiah 54:17, it says if you want to try to rebuke that, you're going to have a heavy lifting experience. But back to the 30 hours. On the 20th of August of 1999, 2 things happened that are significant, and they both involve Canada. David, one of them is what I'm going to talk about with Burrill and Shelton. Do you remember what else happened on the 20th of August of 1999 involving Canada? Yes or no?
No.
Starnet. The Starnet property was raided by RCMP, and a bunch of the hardware was taken. So the question is, did they take it to Washington, D.C., City of London, or upstairs to AMEC? But let's not digress, because it's like going down a rabbit hole and finding a beaver hair. And I can't wait to write chapter 24, because RCMP is going to have a little problem with 2 words, beaver and merkin. And it'll be my great pleasure to stick that right down their throat, because the RCMP and the VPD, which is Vancouver Police Department, didn't give a rat's ass about 100 prostitutes that were ground up in a chipper shredder and fed to people like Alexander Haig at barbecues. If you think God's going to be patient forever and is not going to deliver justice, I guess you're studying a different book than me, but there's not one thing that God doesn't see, and that causes me to tremble a little bit, because I can't even remember everything I've done, but he can, and fortunately, in my case, I've been forgiven and saved. And anyone who hasn't been, if you email me, fieldmcc@yahoo.com, I will put you in touch with Pastor Clyde Holt, who will have a private phone conversation with you and lead you to the foot of the cross. But David, Brill and Henry Shelton on the 20th of August of 1999 signed an agreement that any time Canada asked for it, they would be given the keys to American airspace and the air defense sector of the U.S. military, which involves typically Air National Guard interceptor units. There used to be 2,500 interceptors around the perimeter of the U.S. back at the height of the Cold War. When I was flying interceptors from 77 to 93, we got down to maybe 12 to 16 bases. I'm sure they're below that now because my base, Fargo, lost theirs in 1990. They got a remote base, which is another reason why I tell people all the time, I didn't volunteer for this. God engineered me to be fighting this battle. How do I say God engineered it? Well, I joined the North Dakota Air National Guard. I did not join the Virginia Air National Guard, and yet on 9/11 it was North Dakota Air National Guards that were launched off Langley Air Force Base to block the incoming tracks, and those incoming tracks were targeting the Pentagon. That track got through. The second track was United 93's drone replacement, and that was not going to get through because Kerry and a bunch of other cowards ran out of the U.S. Senate, which was in session in both houses. And also in there, the only people that wouldn't have been in there with insiders knowing what was going to happen to the U.S. Capitol that day. The U.S. Capitol was going to be destroyed by drone number 4, and a couple of other groups or individuals in the Capitol that day was Laura Bush, the president of G.W. Bush. And David, I know you never read the chapters, but I used a new technique in chapter 23. Under each image, with the exception of one, I put a Google bait. And just since I like to titillate people with words and literature, I called it a G-spot. And G stands for Google. So under every picture, there's a G-spot. And those terms, if you take the terms and put them collectively into a search engine, it'll lead you to where I want you to go. And one of the G spots was Angel is next, plus Bush, plus KFGO, plus Offutt, plus maybe Field McConnell. I can't remember. I'll go looking for it in a minute. But if someone reads that and they look at all the other G-spot Google baits, they're going to start thinking that maybe the internet that they created for themselves is going to be the tool that's going to be used against they themselves. And I think in English literature that's considered hoisting oneself upon one's own petard. And David, I forgot your question. Could you ask me again, or did I answer it?
Yeah, I'm sure you did, Phil. Let me just put up something that's just occurred to me. So we have your sister setting up a transportation system launched in 1987, 1988, with a little bit of advice from you, in conjunction with corrupt and treasonous elements inside the United States Secret Service and General Alexander Haig, and Interpol, which was the former Gestapo-run operation towards the end of the Second World War, and was chiefly responsible for Operation Paperclip, moving concentration camp commandants and extortionists into the United States to populate the CIA, which is not to mean that the whole CIA is corrupt, right? But they're misguided. So I've just put up a thing in the chat room field. The City and Guilds livery companies have developed a 6s and 7s approach to crime scene management since the 14th century. With the worshipful company of Skinners, and it just occurred to me, Phil, the beaver hair is a sign that behind the 9/11 attack and the murder of JonBenet Ramsey was the worshipful company of Skinners, which in the 14th century was battling with the worshipful company of merchant tailors for precedence in the Lord Mayor's procession, and they were actually killing each other. So the Lord Mayor, I forget his name at the time, he made a Solomonic decision that in 1 year at the Festival of St. Crispin, I think, then the Skinners would be the 6th in order of the procession. And in the following year, again at the Feast of St. Crispin, the merchant tailors would be. Now, someone please quickly search in Falls Church, Virginia. I believe there's a story related to the theft of pilot uniforms before the 9/11 attack. Well, that would be consistent with the merchant tailor's role. Tailor as in modern spelling Tailor. Back then it was spelled Taylor, and there are famous British boarding schools associated with the merchant tailors and the skinners, meaning they've been educated young people. The great majority of those children grow up with an excellent education, right? But a number of those children will be monitored from a very early age for their potential role in crime scene management associated with the City and Guilds livery companies of London. And this ultimately leads to an implementation of what is known as guild socialism, where guild employees have total control over a supply chain. And to all intents and purposes, modern global trade has 108 supply chains associated with 108 livery companies. Now, how powerful are these livery companies? Well, let me give you one name: the Worshipful Company of International Bankers. Well, folks, the Worshipful Company of International Bankers has just got away with a crime associated with a pool of credit of $90 trillion, laundered through the British Bankers Association, with one of the principal banks being the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank Corporation, which was set up to all intents and purposes and run by David Cameron's great-great-grandfather, Sir Ian Cameron, to run the opium trade. And it still runs the opium trade. But Field's sister has such power over the administration of justice, instead of the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank Corporation being treated as a racketeering, influenced, and corrupt organization in the United States and literally shut down, she's been able to extort a protection payment, do not go to jail, of $1.9 billion that has been distributed, amongst others, between the United States Treasury Asset Forfeiture Fund and the United States Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund, Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund, which she has run with Eric Holder since 1984. So when she called her brother in 1988 asking what kind of technology would prevent a mutiny, this woman had a different game plan. And I'm not saying she fooled Field. That's not easy. But what she did with that technology is she introduced a reign of terror in the United States Bureau of Prisons, with corrupt United States Marshals equipped, amongst other things, with taser devices that they could use to shoot women and children waiting to be transported out of the country, because she was the former senior counsel for the detention and deportation program of the Immigration and Naturalization Service, therefore a prime suspect in the creation and manipulation of the United States Foreign Fugitive File, and in a position to build red teams and blue teams on the fly to perform on a particular day. If I understand correctly, Field, the attack in Mumbai, you have to give me the date.
November of 2008.
Sorry?
November of 2008.
But a very specific day, I think, of relevance to Christians in the United States.
Thanksgiving Day. But you know what? Christians in the United States need to give thanks every day, not just once in November.
Correct. But the point is, the fact is, your sister and her cronies in Chicago, because that was planned apparently out of Chicago, I forget the various names of the suspects, They've been tried and they're basically had their wrists slapped.
They only
But
tried
yeah.
the Pakistani. They didn't try General James Jones, United States Marine Corps, who even his own family thinks he's a little over the top. He was a basketball player at Georgetown. Basketball's okay. Georgetown's not. Georgetown is where Thomas J. Smollett is the senior Jesuit in America. Georgetown is where they turn out anti-American, pro-French perverts like Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, and Chris Marcy, my sister. Back to you, David.
Yeah, but that Pakistani guy, Field, was a Canadian. And he was an immigration consultant in Chicago, and he surveilled the crime scenes in Mumbai, took photographs and videos, etc. And he said, and maybe I'm confusing him with the other guy whose name begins with Tar, and I'm getting too old to remember all these names, but they said that there was a connection with the United States Secret Service or the CIA, and so the inquiry or the prosecution dropped the ball. But that means the Pakistani Canadian or the Indian Canadian or whatever he was, who was specializing in immigration consultancy in Chicago, would have had his name probably and his client's name in your sister's foreign fugitive files. So your sister, through these guys in Chicago, would have been able to assemble a couple of teams of people to hit Mumbai prime time on Thanksgiving Day, when citizens in the United States are gathered around their television sets watching the news, as my brother would vulgarly say, and I don't mean disrespect to American citizens, because this is probably true of every citizen in every country, thumb in bum, mind in neutral. Right? They're sitting looking at what is generated down the boob tube and assuming whatever they hear is true. But this was a manipulated event, because the planning that went into the Mumbai attack included the Iridium satellite phones that was found on the Zodiac boat that came off a mothership with a group of hitmen that arrived in Mumbai and fanned out and went straight for the high-value targets in continuous real-time communication with their handlers, probably using McDonnell-Detweiler communications and Cisco. And I believe they took out rapidly the 3 top anti-terrorist police in Mumbai, and the public was given this extraordinary story of some spontaneous group popping up out of Pakistan for training purposes, and glossed over the fact that Jewish families in, and I forget the name of the house, something like Shalab or whatever, there were a Jewish rabbi and his wife and various children, and they were tortured to death.
Hey, David, your dog's barking.
Yeah, I can't stop that. He's outside, so that's the best I can do. If it's too
no, it's okay.
intrusive, I'll stop.
No, it's not obtrusive at all. And I just posted 2 chapters we wrote about the Mumbai attack. And let's see, I'm not going to go to the links, but you can see that we had Captain Sherlock, Mother Moose, Chapter 3. And the other one is Captain Sherlock, General Greek Speckled, Chapter 2. So if anybody wants to refresh how some people in Chicago and Georgetown attacked Jewish people on Thanksgiving Day in 2008 in Mumbai, India, you know, we wrote about it. In fact, David, off the top of my head, and this I'm 100% lucid on this one, we published one of those chapters before the attack happened. In other words, probably 10 days before they attacked Mumbai, we're talking about Iridium phones and Abu Dhabi. It's not Abu Dhabi. It's another facility near Abu Dhabi and Sharjah, Sharja. So were we prescient, or were we informed, or were we lucky, or were we all, or were we none? Who knows? But we can prove that we published a story about the deployment of iridium sat phones and Zodiac boats before the attack happened. And that should scare people like General Jim, I think, or maybe it's James Jones, United States Marine Corps, who at 6'3" or 6'6" thinks that everybody's going to bow to people based on size. No, Max Cleland, his picture is in chapter 23. Now, he's the Army guy who left 3 of his major limbs over in Khe Sanh in April of '68, thinking he was doing something noble and loyal for America, when actually he turns out he was just doing something very regrettable for the global bankers involved in the narcotics trafficking out of the Golden Triangle. And when they sent the narcotics out of the Golden Triangle, a lot of them were in plastic bags inside the body cavities of deceased veterans. Over to you, David.
I've just found this article about the torture. It's very interesting from a propaganda point of view. Something to think about if you're listening to the major media outlets as they skirt this unspeakably foul aspect of the Islamists' attack in Mumbai. You see, there they presume it's an attack by Islam, but it's an attack, I'm 100% certain, Phil, by people recruited through your sister's foreign fugitive file to act as though they were Islamists, knowing, and this is knowledge that pertains to what your sister, is that the individuals were entrapped and extorted at some past events, possibly with SOS Children's Villages, which are all over Pakistan and India, to perform a role. Doctors at the Mumbai hospital who did the victims of the past week's jihadist attack, again, the presumption, jihadist, nothing to do with jihadism, were rendered nearly speechless by the carnage. As 2 doctors explained in the Indian news website, rediff.com, violent gang wars and previous terror attacks didn't hold a candle to what happened. The bodies of the victims showed clear signs of the pre-execution torture. The worst torture, they said, were the Jewish victims. As one doctor put it, of all the bodies, the Israeli victims bore the maximum torture marks. It was clear that they were killed on the first day of the assault. It was obvious that they were tied up and tortured before they were killed. It was so bad that I do not want to go over the details, even in my head again. India's intelligence bureau revealed that a captured jihadist, is the word again, explained that they were instructed to seek out foreign and especially Israeli victims. The instructions were coming through the foreign fugitive file set up by your sister in 1987 with Bob Paulson and Interpol and General Alexander Haig. Now, where did we hear about or infer that kind of level of torture? In the StarNet model, raided 20th of August 1999 at 425 Carroll Street. StarNet by then, over a period of 3 to 4 years, had built the world's leading online gaming capability in 60 countries, where people could bet on interactive sadomasochistic pornography involving children and launder money. And Sergeant or Corporal Bob Paulson, whatever he was, with a high-tech team from the RCMP in Ottawa, orchestrated a raid on the StarNet premises at 425 Carroll Street and took away the servers, the Ciscos, the encryption systems, the documentation, and presumably, although it would have been stored on a remote server, keys to the archives that showed adults, presumably or probably RCMP associates of Bob Paulson, committing the kinds of indignities on the human body that we now associate with the murder of JonBenet Ramsey and the attacks on the prostitutes out at the pig farm where the bodies were processed at barbecues in Cannibal Feast. Now, if we talk to the average people cold about this, and I think I did it perhaps inadvertently or unwisely to a friend of Field's in Plum City the other day, and I could tell by the horror in his voice, he really didn't want to go there, and I understand that.
I wonder who that was that I palmed you off. I remember palming your phone call off, but I don't remember to whom. Do you remember to whom?
What did he started, he gave me his name, and then at the end of the conversation, he didn't want to, but he said that you told me that he had another lifestyle, an alternative lifestyle. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, yeah. Well, to be frank, he's a homosexual, but he's a very intelligent guy. He's a well-informed guy, but and I have the same experience with him every time he sees me hanging around Molly's, which when I phrase it that way, it sounds like I'm Molly's every day, but I'd say it's once every 3 months I might be at Molly's at the same time as him having dinner, because when I'm home alone, there's an expression, when the cat's away, the mice will play. And when the cat's away, I also like to go to Molly's for dinner. In fact, today's Monday. I wish you wouldn't have brought up Molly's. Oh, never mind. I brought it up. Molly's is closed on Mondays. But first day I have a chance, and that should be Thursday, my daughter, who just cleaned up on a bunch of awards at a county fair, Washington County, Minnesota fair yesterday, where I had to go collect the goats. Come to think of it, she was still asleep this morning when I had to go let the goats out of the trailer. But I'm very proud of my daughter, and not overly proud like some people are, like if their little boy's a star quarterback on the football team, whoop-de-doo. I mean, somebody's got to be the star quarterback. I mean, if it wasn't him, it'd be some other kid. But anyway, I'm very proud of my children, 5 of them, because they've been willing to humble themselves, if you will. If you're going to a fair and you're taking a goat or a chicken, you're not likely to be thought of as a snob. And it's been my real pleasure to have goats on my property, regardless of what property it is. The 160-acre farm in Clay County, Minnesota, that was taken fraudulently by bankruptcy judge in a black dress named Dennis D. I can't remember anymore. It's Dennis D. something, O'Donnell. Anyway, whoever he is, he's still a corrupt judge in a black dress, and I'm having a good day in Plum City, population 599. So he who laughs best doesn't have a black dress to wear. No, the guy, he doesn't have the IQ or the time, and that sounds like I'm being a little snobby here. He is a very smart guy, but he doesn't have the background information plus the processing speed that he would need to understand what you were talking about. And so when he gets to the TMI point, too much information, especially if it's offensive to him. And then I don't know if you mentioned anything about the lesbian females or militant lesbians. That might be something that would cause him to lose interest too. And I want to point out for the record that the only time anybody ever stopped when I had a broken down Studebaker, it was a car full of lesbians. And see, I don't care if they're lesbians or not. Just don't try to recruit my daughters. In fact, I have a niece that's a lesbian, so I would suggest that she doesn't try to recruit her nieces. But I told this lesbian lady that stopped, she went out of her way. She saw, my cars are easy to recognize. So when she saw me sitting by the side of the road, she canceled her right turn, made a left turn, and came over and asked me if I needed any help. And I said, no, I got 2 pieces of help coming, but I promise that if you ever need your snow moved in the winter, give me a call and I'll be right over. And it was 2 years later that my phone rang in February this year. She said, you've always told me if I needed some help with snow, you'd come and do it. And I said, that's right. And she says, well, I'm okay, but I have a neighbor person who happens to also be a woman that's not interested in men. That doesn't matter. I had this neighbor who I'd never met. She had a quarter of a mile of snow, and it was 4 feet deep because they'd been using a plow truck, which creates windrows. So when you get drifting snow, now it fills in everything between the windrows. So I went over there, and in 15 minutes, I moved a quarter of a mile of 4 foot deep snow, probably 10 feet wide. And when they tried to pay me, I said, no, you can't pay me because one of your friends offered to help me when I needed help. So now I've helped you guys back and we're even. But I said, that doesn't mean since I don't have a chit where you don't owe me something or I don't owe you something, it doesn't mean if it snows again, I won't come do it. I said I will, because that's what neighbors are for. So it's nice to help your neighbors. Sometimes you can get to be known as a soft touch, and then they might start calling too often, and then you learn, it's called discernment. You learn how much support you can give other people without withdrawing support from your own family, and then life goes on. But I forgot your question, but oh, I know what it was. Who was the guy that you talked to on the phone? Yes. The code word to myself to remember the guy's name, which I'm not going to put out there, is Western North Dakota, because he originally is from a little dinky town in Western North Dakota. He had an uncle who was a attack pilot, and I think A6 attack pilot in Vietnam, and he had great respect for and love for and admiration for his uncle, who he thought was a hero. And military people aren't heroes. A lot of times the media says they're a hero when they're simply dead. And I didn't say Simply Red, which is a rock group from the 80s. So I think I was going to say they did So True, but that was Spandau Ballet. And of course, if you don't know what a Spandau Ballet is, it's not a dance, but during World War I, Spandau made machine guns. And when the German machine guns were aiming at U.S. troops, I presume they started dancing around as they tried to find a hole to jump into. So, David, I answered your question because it dawned on me who you were talking to. But the stuff we deal in 3 times a week is stuff that most people cannot process because it's so evil and nobody wants it to be true. But I'll say this very clearly. It's my belief that God has assembled a network that can not only process it, but we can stomach it, because as regretful as things like JonBenet Ramsey, Matty McCann, and Gareth Williams are, if somebody doesn't fight this battle, the evil parties win. And of course, we know eternally the evil parties do not win. David, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. So Sherlock says, Jack Mac, one of my clients was the highest ranking Canadian diplomat in Mumbai at the time. I spoke to him during the crisis about business matters, and he was as calm as a cucumber as this was going on, and very matter of fact, like it was no big deal. And Sherlock says, like maybe he knew it was going to happen. Well, the Canadians, through the Foreign Fugitive File, would have recruited and been able to manipulate files. So the people behind the attack in Mumbai would have been in a particular partition on that file where the American intelligence would not have been able to observe that they were being deployed. And here's the criteria for entry. Records may be entered for individuals who are wanted for violations of the Criminal Code of Canada and for whom there is an outstanding Canada-wide warrant that meets the requirements of the Extradition Treaty, Title 18 U.S.C. Section 3184. These entries can only be made for authorized Canadian agency by the RCMP. Let's personalize it specifically by Bob Paulson. Other foreign fugitive file records may only be entered by Interpol, based upon the following criteria. The wanting country has an outstanding arrest warrant that charges a crime which would be a felony if committed in the United States. The wanting country is a signatory to an extradition treaty convention with the United States. So I'm going to challenge you, Field, a little bit.
Oh, good. I love challenges.
Right? There's a man in the context of a death threat you received from Afghanistan who was wanted in Canada, right? And was organized by the Canadians to set up a Y2K attack, probably in collaboration with your sister's mate, Bruce McConnell, in Los Angeles. And he would have been in this foreign fugitive file set up by your sister. What's that man's name?
Are you talking about the guy that tried to cross the Canadian border at Port Angeles, Washington?
I am, and he did cross the Canadian border. He was not intercepted by Canada, even though we had the arrest warrant. He was intercepted perhaps once in the United States.
Okay, and I do not recall his name.
Ahmed Rezan.
That's what I meant to say, Ahmed Rezan.
Well, on that field, it's 2 days to my birthday. I think you know, whether anything happens on my birthday, that's up to you with your timing. I think the whole stinking mess has fallen apart right in front of our eyes, and these extraordinary clues, a beaver hair has helped knock it all over. Anyway, over to you. It's an hour. We've done an hour and a half. I don't know if you want to carry on or to the top of the hour. It's up to you.
Yeah, it doesn't matter to me. Let's see what the chat room wants to do, if there's anybody left in the chat room, which apparently there is. Question about, not that I'm fixated on beaver hair, but the question is, the British guys that dress up like they're going to protect some diplomats, they have red uniforms and they have big furry black hats. Is that a beaver hat, do you know, David?
Yes, it was. Now they use plastic.
And they use plastic?
No, traditionally it was a beaver hat, right? And the beaver trade, remember, was basically driven into the United States by Jacob Astor or etc. And little Samcam, Wham Bam Thank You Ma'am, she would have been part of one of these foreign fugitive file teams. When she arrived in the United States in New York on Monday the 9th, she would have been responsible, I would suggest, for liaison with the tricky foreign fugitive team that was to go into ground zero area and manipulate the evidence on 911 so it didn't lead back to the 6s and 7s livery companies in the UK. Over to you.
Yeah, well, I think I'm going to use, I know that on my other computer, I have a picture of a bunch of these phony baloney English people dressed up in these formal suits with beaver hats. And there's a picture, I wish I had it here, I'd put it up right now. Maybe somebody, in fact, if anybody has this picture, let me see if CCW is here. Yeah, he'd be the most likely.
Sorry, I don't like interrupt, but I think actually they're bearskins. Maybe someone in the chat room can check that. Maybe they're not beavers, maybe they're bearskins.
Ah, good idea. Whatever they are, I know that when Obama went on one of his first official visits over there to England, a bunch of these guys with furry hats, great big tall things like you find on a Beefeater bottle. David, you're making noise again, which is okay. That proves you're alive. I don't want you to expire before your 70th birthday. Because on Thursday, I think Thursday's the 7th. No, Wednesday's the 7th. That means we're going to be on air on your birthday, doesn't it?
Yep.
Okay, well, I've made a TBA, that means to be announced, but I've already reserved a slot here at Livestream for a TBA show that'll come up, like if I'm sitting at home at 2 o'clock in the morning and my phone rings and somebody says they just blew up a Palindaba pickle in Assumption Parish, Louisiana, regardless of my state, if I'm good enough to drive downhill 2 miles, and of course gravity would be on my side, I'll go right down here to the studio and I'll come up live, because I want these people to know they're not fooling all of us. They're only fooling most of us. The people that read the newspapers, listen to the radio, and watch TV, they're easy to fool, but some of us aren't. And I'm going to go find this picture of Obama, and I think, and I'll have to check, I'm not sure, but I think Prince Philip was in the picture, because I remember referring to these guys collectively as, and the title on the picture was Beaver-Hat also. So a lot of the stuff we deal in, David, I find regrettable, and a lot of the terms that I use I find regrettable, but it just doesn't seem there's any other tool out there other than the truth. And if you're going to publish 55,000 pages of cross-reference truth, you might have to write 2 or 3 books that make it look like the person writing the book knows very little except how to determine pastel colors and what old song might have been popular in 1984, which of course brings us back to the Statler brothers and I believin' in you, ooh, that makes me Atlanta blue. And it's so unusual that I would think of that song this morning, because just last night I wrote that chapter and our airplane was going to Atlanta. And we have a lady agent in Atlanta who you can search if you want to find anything we've ever written. Just put in Hamish, H-A-M-I-S-H, plus chips, plus pastel, plus IOC, plus the search term. So if you do that and you put in Moxie, M-O-X-I-E, single initial G as in golf, you can find that we have used our agent Moxie G before, And according to our fiction writing, she works at the CDC, which is the Center for Disease Control. It probably should be more likely to be the CDD, which is the Center for Disease Deployment. Over to you, David.
See if I can dig into my memory bank, because that beaver hair system has really teased my brain.
There's a
in the
David. There's
lady. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a picture that Sherlock just put up, and it's called Bearskin. So anyway, back to you.
Okay. A study in Scarlet, I think, was one of the first stories published by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle under the Sherlock Holmes genre. And that was around the period the women were being disappeared in Whitechapel, later attributed to Jack the Ripper. And at the end of the story of Study in Scarlet, where he attributed the killings to the Mormons, Sherlock Holmes was addressing a respectful audience of policemen wondering about his forensic skills. And he said something to the effect, there are many people in life who, given a series of events, will tell you what will come to pass. There are very few people who, given an event, can give you the circumstances that led up to it. So whether or not I'm good at it, or you're good at it, or the people in the chat room are good at it, I would suggest the beaver hair at the JonBenet crime scene, whether it was placed intentionally or dropped inadvertently, is such a pivotal event. And if we collectively get to understand where that beaver hair came from. Now, very interesting, the beaver hair will have DNA. An analysis of the beaver hair DNA at the JonBenet crime scene, assuming they haven't destroyed it, will probably be able to tell us what beaver population that hide or a piece of apparel came from. My predictions are that it will come from a beaver colony in British Columbia. And it will be associated with the winter uniform of the RCMP, one of Bob Paulson's colleagues. My guess is that that individual, may actually be a man or a woman, is probably bilingual, speaks French and English, and was involved in writing the ransom note, which includes words like attaché. And the individual who wore the winter hat consistent with the RCMP uniform for December of 1996 was in a plane, possibly flown by the pedophile psychopath Russell Williams, probably with the knowledge and consent of Bob Paulson, together with a parolee from the Canadian prison system, who would have been in jail for rape and murder, possibly Carla Homolka, if the time is right, or Paul Bernardo. Remembering that in May of 1991, two pairs got married, one Paul Bernardo with Carl Homolka, the other one Russell Williams with Mary Elizabeth Harriman. Well, I'm not saying that Russell Williams was Paul Bernardo's best man, but they knew each other at the University of Toronto during the period of the Scarborough rapes, and they were great friends. My guess is they were raping and killing together, and their girlfriends / wives were filming it, i.e. both sets of wives were into interactive S&M, sadomasochistic sex. So I think we've got a story to die for, Phil. And when we talk about heroes, for me, my hero is little JonBenet Ramsey. And I'm sure she was as brave as she could be. but she was alone, and we will take revenge. Over to you.
Yeah, and I think what I'm going to start doing now, because I doubt if you even looked at either version of the chapter, but the chapter went up last night about 10 or 11 o'clock. It went up at Abel Danger, and sometime overnight, the wee hours, it went up at presidentialfield.com. But I think this new technique where I'm using Google Baits or G-spots on every image. If you take a look, David, there's two images of guys with these big black hats on. Do you see them on your chat thing?
Yes, I do.
Okay, I found my own image because I Googled image plus Scotland Yard shellac plus a certain prince's name plus Lord Beaver-Hat plus Worshipful Company of Beavers. In fact, that chapter, and let me just find the chapter if I have it. Yeah, okay, hang on, David. I'm going to get the chapter link because there's some very useful stuff in this chapter. And just like everyone else, I can't remember. I think we have 250 or 255 chapters out there. So nobody except the perpetrators can remember what we stuff in which chapter. But I'm going to go back and review the chapter that's coming up right now. I'm posting it as I speak. I'm going to go back and review this chapter, and the tactical significance of my reviewing my own chapter is I can say then in fiction, of course, because everything I do is fiction since I'm such a troubled guy, I can say that we told the United States and Canadian and English investigative branches about all this stuff 3 years ago. And there's some I'm not suggesting anybody go back and read that chapter, but if you just scroll through and look at some of the images, there's a place in Kentucky, and you cannot make this up, David. This is so hilarious. There is a small convenience store in Beaver Lick, Kentucky, called Beaver Lick Outpost, and I've got a wonderful, and it's not me. I don't do any of this stuff. I'm not sure. Yeah, I've been to Kentucky as recently as about 18 months ago. I went down to Georgia to pick up a limousine from Cherokee Auto at 918 Unavetter Drive in Canton, Georgia, which is a Cherokee location. That's why they call it Cherokee Auto Group. Some of those Indians that were abused by the U.S. because they wanted to get the Cherokee off their own land because there was something of a mineral nature in that land. So they had this big deal that you might have heard of as the Trail of Tears. Well, Barry Soetoro, or whatever your name is, Barack Obama, probably more likely it's Barack Monier Ubaid. In fact, if Ginger Cookie's still here, and let's see if she is, or yep, she is. Ginger, I know you're probably working, but you had a pretty hilarious definition from the Urban Dictionary of what the word Uniform Bravo Alpha Yankee Delta, that's the apparent name that Barry Soetoro was going by in the time between when he graduated from Punahou School as Barry Soetoro, Indonesian Muslim. Then that was in 1979. 3 years later in Canada, and I almost bet it would be British Columbia, Canada, he legally changed his name from Barack Monier Ubaid to Barack Hussein Obama. So all we need to find out is who the Canadian weasels are. No disrespect to weasels, by the way. We got to find out who the Canadian weasels are that changed this piece of human effluence into Barack Hussein Obama and then crammed him down our throats. So David, if you can just give me a couple of minutes, I'm going to go try to find the definition of Ubaid, and it might take me 3 minutes. So why don't you start talking about something that's worth 3 minutes of our time, and I'll be right back. But I won't leave you or forsake you. And if I die laughing, Pastor Clyde Holt is still here, and I'll even put the camera on him so he doesn't have to move to take my place. David, I'll be here, so if you need me, call.
Okay, Field. Well, just in case people think the Royal Canadian Mounted Police would never, ever employ someone who would be into sadomasochistic sex using social networking sites. We actually have an article here, a Coquitlam PC RCMP officer is under investigation by the force for possible misconduct after violent and pornographic photographs of the officer were posted on a social networking site for sexual fetishes. Now, there's an anonymous suggestion that this guy, Corporal Jim Brown, was into threesomes with Dave Picton, who's the brother of Willie Picton, who's now serving a double life sentence, which is unheard of, for second-degree murder, because the jury couldn't find enough evidence to convict for first-degree murder, which requires pre-planning and premeditation. So it looks like the RCMP, how widespread, we don't know, but I can assure you from limited knowledge of organizations that if there is a small stratum of people inside an organization like the RCMP that is into this kind of sexual activity, which is being photographed and shared on networking sites, and the average novice who becomes or enters the RCMP in good faith discovers it, then you're going to have a chill factor that really renders the RCMP a joke. That is to say, when I grew up in the UK after the Second World War, my grandfather had 6 brothers, and one of them, as I understand it, Uncle Pick, I think his name was, probably we could track him down, it'd be interesting. He was an RCMP, and he allegedly had been shot by an arrow in his stomach during some Indian wars somewhere. But the story that came through the family was the RCMP always get their man. Well, it looks like on Christmas Day of 1996, they got a little girl. That is truly sobering for someone who thinks of himself as both a proud Brit and a proud Canadian, that I seem to have become associated countries that are almost irredeemably corrupt. So I'm 70 on August the 7th. I don't want to keep hammering that. For me, it's a very important decade. And I would love to see the first signs that these people are going to be up before a firing squad. So anyway, it's 12:55 field, so I think we should shut down at 1. Over to you.
Yeah, we can shut down at 1, and I think Ginger Cookie must think I'm lazy because apparently I missed her posting this Ibad or Ubad. But anyway, I can't make this stuff up. This came from Urban Dictionary, but the name that Barack Obama used before he changed himself from this name to Obama in 1982 in Canada, it says this: etymology unknown, but most likely derived from Latin ubidus, meaning hairy camel trader. Okay, well, I mean, you can't make this stuff up, David. I didn't make it up. Sometimes people tell me I'm either a brilliant or perverted writer. No, I'm not. I'm just an observer. I take a look at what's out there. I match it with a song and a pastel color, and we're off to the races. And in chapter 24, I've already started framing that chapter, and today is Monday, isn't it, Pastor Clyde? Today is Monday. We could have a chapter up Wednesday if anything foolish occurs, or we can have a lengthy one, and I know Ginger Cookie really likes those lengthy chapters. And if you ever want to find out a good place to have a beer in Washington, D.C., you could just Google Hamish plus chips plus pastel plus IOC plus lengthy portion. But last night's chapter wasn't quite a lengthy portion. I honestly, and I know this will drive you nuts, and that's just too darn bad, David, but I was really trying to stretch that into a 60-page chapter, because think about it strategically. If the people that we send it to in FBI and DHS don't read every word, they're not really responsibly discharging the offices that a lot of taxpayers think they're supposed to be discharging. They have an oath of office. A lot of these guys, by age 40 or 50, they realize that they've been duped, and then they change sides. And I think that myself in particular, and perhaps you to a lesser degree, I think I'm actually being protected by the agencies because they see us as doing the investigative research that they are capable of doing, but they're prohibited from doing so by the Senior Executive Service. And if anybody's never heard this, take a look at United States Senior Executive Service. That's the glass window. A bunch of women in the 60s and 70s were talking about a glass ceiling. That's nothing. There's a big solid titanium ceiling, and it's under the feet of the United States Senior Executive Service, which was authorized in 1978 by Jimmy Carter. Jimmy and his brother Billy were such notorious dolts that their mother, and I can't remember Lillian Carter's name, and if I could remember the name Lillian Carter, I'd not be so foolish as to tie that to the statement that she was thought of as having the two biggest boobs in Georgia, those boobs being Billy and Jimmy. I don't know if Billy was a draft dodger, Jimmy was, and Jimmy was a draft dodger at the same time that Alexander Haig was a draft dodger. 1943 to 1947. They both jumped into the West Point or Annapolis, take your pick, and they thought that'll keep them out of World War II. Well, if we're going to consider people in academies draft dodgers, then I'm one also, because I went to Annapolis in 1967, graduated in 71, but I went there only because my parents wouldn't allow me to go join the Army. I wanted to go be a helicopter pilot in Vietnam, because back then I was naive enough to think that we had a purpose for being in Vietnam, which we did. It was to make HSBC and some other banks insanely rich. And yet, with all their vast wealth, they're never satisfied. They only want one thing, and that's M-O-R-E. What they're going to get is judgment and eternity. And I don't have any preference or any control over their eternity, but they do. And they know who to talk to and what they must do to make sure that they're in the non-smoking section instead of the smoking section. So, David, it's time to call for the big, ooh, there's some big yellow buttons. That's Ginger, really nice work. A lot of these, this one has Obama on the 2% side and Romney on the skim. So anyway, Ginger, if Mensa's asleep at the switch, I'm going to ask Mensa to put up the big red button and give me the 1, 2, 3, or is it 3, 2, 1, push it. And until then, David, why don't you say goodbye again, and then when I get the big red button, I'm just the guy that can push it.
Okay, well, I'll say goodbye, and just before signing off in the chat room, I'll try and get that quote from Sherlock Holmes up, but look forward to Wednesday, Field. Over to you.
Okay, I'll see you Wednesday, and I'll talk to you numerous times between now and then. And then there's a picture of Ginger kissing me goodbye when I was leaving from, I think, I'm trying to remember, which was this? Was this when we were out in Las Vegas, Ginger? I think at Nellis. But anyway, Ginger was looking rather sporty in her heels up there on the F-16. The big red button's up. We'll all enjoy the countdown now. I got the 3, 2, 1. I got my finger at the ready. And this, by the way, is an F-16. That's a canopy. 3, 2, 1.